Greetings, friends and fellow entrepreneurial teachers, and Happy New Year. It's the first podcast episode of 2024. And this is going to be a very exciting year for the podcast with lots of interviews with some really spectacular humans. And Ken Caputo, my partner, is going to be joining me more often on the podcast as well. We recently launched our Integrated Entrepreneur Academy, and we're growing a community of entrepreneurial teachers as well as people from all walks of life that are seeking to spiral up their lives. And I'm sure at some point we're going to do an episode talking about the life spiral. But today we're going to actually start with the topic of integration. So welcome, Ken.
I am very, very excited for 2024. It's definitely going to be a fun year.
So in our working partnership, Ken is the visionary in Momentum Learning Systems, our business, and I'm the integrator. So the topic of integration has a special place near and dear to my heart. And basically the way it works is I create order out of chaos and Ken creates the chaos. That's pretty much how things tend to go.
Pretty
So
much.
yeah. So integration in the context that we're talking about it today, very appropriately for the start of the new year, is when all of the pieces of your life fit together to create a feeling of continuity and congruency as you move through the various roles you play. So that means that you feel like yourself, whether you're at work, with your family, out with your friends, or even when you're just alone with yourself. And you may present with different filters, let's say. So if you stub your toe at work, you might choose different words to express yourself than if you were to stub your toe in the comfort of your own home. But being integrated means that the same values drive your choices everywhere in your life, and you feel like you're being true to yourself in each area of your day-to-day. So the framework that we like to use, which actually is the foundation of the Quester's Way model, if you're familiar with our Family Empowerment Center, that was run under the idea of these 5 practices, which are move, think, connect, fuel, and empower.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, and I think that the big thing just as we're looking through this lens of these 5 practices is thinking through in advance what each of them means to you and how do you design a life that aligns and meshes with those practices in all of the different forms that it takes. So whether it's your business or your job or your home life, wherever you like to go, you want to be aware of how these things manifest best for you. And that's what really leads to that feeling of integration. So for us, we look at this strategically from a design perspective instead of just being in reaction and figuring it out as you go.
Yeah, and I think this desire to have this integration is why we both ended up choosing an entrepreneurial path, and why I think a lot of the people that we're working with, the integrated entrepreneurs we're working with, have chosen the entrepreneurial path because it does allow you more control, at least seemingly on the surface, because there's a lot that goes into running a business that you don't realize until you get into it. But it allows you more control and freedom to make sure that the values that are important to you are woven into your day-to-day life. It can be harder when 1/3 of your day is kind of spoken for. The environment is outside of your control. If you're working in somebody else's business, if you have a regular job, it can be a little bit harder, but you can still find that integration if, as you think through these practices and you think about your values, you align that to whatever work you are doing and try to find that synergy. And there's a lot of people actually, Dirty Jobs. Who is the guy that I'm forgetting his name, and I just heard it the other day, but the guy that did that show Dirty Jobs years ago actually did a TED Talk talking about the fact that there were people that had jobs that none of the rest of us would ever want to do, whether it was like sanitation or just doing nasty, dirty jobs, and they found life fulfillment because it allowed them to create the life they wanted. So they had a clear vision and they were willing to learn how to love the work, even when it looked like work that wasn't fun or wasn't anything that anyone would want to do. So that's where integration comes from. If you're clear on who you are and what values you hold, then you can find a different perspective, a different way of looking at the obligations and responsibilities that you have in your life.
Yeah, and I think that the other thing that that really reinforces is in the end, the answer is you. The work is less important than the person that you choose to be who does that work. So now you can deal with work that maybe is a stepping stone. Maybe it isn't your ideal, passionate thing you want to do for your whole life, but it's something that you can do because you understand what's important to you. And we just use the five practices as a lens. So we have a way to kind of categorize how we express those important things. And we have a way to kind of practice in advance and make some investments in ourselves that we can withdraw when it's difficult times. So if you cultivate, your own physical well-being and health, then when you're doing a job that's a little bit exhausting, you've got some reserves built up for that. You can handle it better. So that's the other process of integration. It's a plan and an intention that you need to nurture and cultivate, not leave to chance.
Yeah, and there are a lot of different ways you can explore your values, a lot of ways that you can go about, defining this for yourself. And there's a lot of great resources out there. This model is just the one that kind of resonates with us for creating, a holistic person, a well-rounded person. And it kind of hits all of the different elements that we find are very important to having that feeling of integration and balance and vitality and connection and contribution in our lives, which is a hint at the life spiral that we may need to talk about next time. Because as we were preparing for this, the life spiral kept coming up. So maybe that's our next podcast topic. But we'll start with move, which is a favorite of Ken's for sure. So move is simply experiencing the joy of physical movement in a way that adds vitality and health to your life. So it can take a lot of different forms. It doesn't necessarily have to be rigorous fitness that leaves you sweating and gasping for air on the floor. There's a lot of different ways to express yourself through movements. Ken likes the gasping for air on the floor version for some weird reason, but doing Spartan races and all that fun stuff. But yeah, so Ken, do you want to give us a little bit more on the move practice?
Yeah, and yes, and I do take it to an extreme, but that's probably my favorite of the practices. So that's a point of emphasis, and that's okay. It's good to know that for yourself as you're thinking about all of these. You'll relate to them different ways. One thing to consider with move, though, research more and more, especially over the last 10 years, this is movement and exercise is a miracle drug. It is the thing that will keep you living long and living well, far beyond anything else that you can possibly do in your life. So, thinking in terms of how you integrate movement practices that are going to keep your muscles strong, which has an incredible amount of not only impact on metabolically on your body, but brain health, resistance to all kinds of cancers, Alzheimer's, everything. So, and there's just tons of research. So it's worth looking into if you need a little bit of motivation for that. But the idea is thinking, what are movement practices that you enjoy? And what are movement practices that are investments in your future self? The self that you're going to be 10 years from now as you're moving through your life and your relationships change and your careers change and your interests change. You're going to take your health with you. That's the thing that's going to, as Dennis Waitley said, get you from birth to death with the least amount of overhauls. What's the way he used to describe it?
Yeah, and there's I think one of the best things to think about, if especially if you're a busy professional or a busy parent or a busy both, which is two full-time jobs plus trying to figure your own self out through all of that and maintain some sense of autonomy when most of your time is spoken for. Thinking about ways that you can duplicate your efforts or just swap habits. We talk about swapping a lot. But in terms of like duplicating your efforts, if you have young kids, I know there's YouTube videos out there that are fun exercises that you can do with your little one, where you're basically like goblet squatting your toddler. And of course, they're going to love that. They're going to think it's a great, fun game, or, doing the Superman thing where you're holding up over you, like laying on the floor. And there's a lot of ways that you can bring your own fitness into the play that you're doing with your child. So now, to jump ahead, Connect is about our connections and relationships with other people. Now you're getting a 2-for-1 special where you're connecting with your kid, you're spending time with them when you're not staring at a cell phone, and you're strengthening that relationship while you're also strengthening your body. And then the other one is actually, do you have anything to say about duplicating your efforts with Move before I mention the other thing?
Yeah, I think just the other thing to consider is how can you creatively weave the concept of movement into your work, like your work day. So whether it's a walking, treadmill and a standing desk, or like I do a lot of calls with clients and I'll get permission to walk. Some might even do while I'm doing zone 2 running, and it keeps me from getting out of breath. So, if they're okay with that, you can do that kind of thing. But being creative and prioritizing ways to weave it in, because the idea isn't you move to start your day and then sit on your butt. That's actually not very healthy for you. So you've got to find ways to keep weaving it in and out throughout your day.
Which leads me right into the second point that I wanted to bring up. Exercise snacking is something that a lot of research is showing is very beneficial. So that would be, all right, now when we're working anyways to start thinking about think a little bit, you have chunking is the most effective way to get work done. If you try to just plow through 4 hours without taking any breaks, you're going to hit that point of diminishing return. So you need to build in breaks before you mentally get tired. And one of the best ways to do that is every 45 minutes, 50 minutes, however you're breaking up your workday, give yourself a little movement break and do some squats or lunges or pull-ups if you have access to a pull-up bar, or push-ups or something to kind of get your blood flow going. So now you've done stuff to help your brain think better when you go back to work, and you've also, brought that little bit of exercise in for your body as well. And there's a lot of benefits to exercise snacking that the studies have been showing.
Yeah, big time. And really, it's been really interesting because they're finding that people that just go to the gym for an hour in the morning, say, and then they're sedentary for the next 9 or 10 hours at work, a lot of the health benefits don't stick because it's that snacking, it's those intervals of movement that we build in consistently. That's where the real benefit comes from. So yeah, and the last thing with movement is you can think in terms of, we talk about the 5 pillars: strength, that would come from resistance training; mobility; stability, so that's things like balance and your ability to functionally move your body; flexibility, right, stretching; and then the last one's conditioning, so how well you work your heart. So figuring out ways to kind of tag each of those as best you can, and there's lots of practices and exercises and activities you can do that hit multiples of those. So, but trying to make sure that you don't leave any gaps. That's going to let you get the most value from your movement practices.
And a real simple thing that you can work into your day that I'll mention before we move on to think is the soleus push-up, which actually isn't really what you would think of as a push-up, but soleus is spelled Soleus, and you can Google it and find out more about it. But it's basically a seated calf raise. So while you're sitting at your desk, you're stuck on a Zoom meeting or a call, or you've just been working for a while. There's times where I'll actually set my little cube timer to remind me to do it every 15 or 30 minutes. And you just literally sit on the edge of your seat with your legs, at like a 90-degree angle, and then you just press up with your up onto the balls of your feet and then drop your heels. So you're just doing a simple calf raise. And there's also a lot of benefits that studies are showing just for that. There's just that simple exercise.
Yeah, Harvard Medical School is studying it right now because it's crazy. Just it's like the equivalent of going for a run, like what it does for you metabolically, and they're finding it could help with diabetes and all kinds of crazy stuff. And it just has to do with the way that muscle activates and stimulates when you do that simple movement. So it's pretty cool.
All right, so think is probably the one that I'm hyperactive in after kind of busting on you for all the movement. Think is where I tend to get stuck and spend lots of time. But think is the proactive stimulation of your mind that keeps your brain youthful and active. So this is anything that you're doing to stretch and grow your mind, whether it's reading, learning new things. My favorite think over the last year that I've been getting into is the Zettelkasten, which is a note-taking system, which has slowed down my reading, but deepened my reading because I'm drawing more out of the books that I'm learning from, rather than just kind of like zipping through as quick as I can and saying I read it. I'm taking the time to process and kind of exercise and contemplate, exercise my mind and contemplate the ideas. So think. What do you got for think, Ken?
Yeah, I think the big thing first is understanding neuroplasticity,
Mm.
which is really just the brain's ability. If you imagine you have a forest and you walk through the forest, you're going to struggle until you've walked through the forest the same way over and over again to create a pathway. And that's really kind of the simplest way to summarize neuroplasticity. It's the more we do something, the easier it gets for us to do it. And we used to think that as you age, your brain kind of almost hardened and it became harder to learn new things. And that is not true. Our brain maintains its neuroplasticity for as long as we're alive. But the problem is, if you don't stimulate it, now you have one path through the forest and everything else is just overgrown. So activating and stimulating our brain, doing things that help us learn in new ways are basically allowing you to blaze multiple trails through this forest so that you don't become rigid in your thinking over time. So, so it can be anything. Listening to podcasts. I've been using Duolingo for the last year or so and just learning a second language. And I may never even speak it, but I'm stimulating my brain. There's a learning process. There's apps like Headway is kind of a cool one. They do all kinds of summaries, and you can pick a topic, whether it's business or finances or family or relationships or fitness, and you can do these little 15-minute summaries on that.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Steph.
Blinkist is another app that does that as well.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. So the idea is just again making it intentional because especially our work can become repetitive. We have certain things that we do over and over again. That's just part of it. Our lives can become a little bit repetitive, which is also important, certain habits that we form. So how do you find ways to keep your brain developing and strengthening just like your body by stimulating it in constantly new, different, and interesting ways?
Yeah, I was just going to add that the diversity is important. So just doing jigsaw puzzles all the time, there's a benefit, but not as much as doing a jigsaw puzzle and then a crossword and then going and taking a ballroom dancing lesson, and engaging your mind in that way. Now you're also engaging move too, so duplicating your efforts,
Mhm.
but it's finding new and different ways to engage your mind, because if you just keep walking the same paths over and over again, that's not carving new neural pathways. Now you're just strengthening, and then over time, especially as we age, it starts, the pruning starts to almost happen too much, and then you start losing those connections, and that can lead to some of the neurodegenerative stuff as you get older. Speaking of which, with Think, John Medina's books, Brain Rules, are a great resource. There's a lot of great resources out there, but that one is a good go-to. So Brain Rules was the first one, which was just all about this topic that we're talking about. And then he also did Brain Rules for babies. So if you have little ones, That one's, I think that was like 0 to 5, age 5, and the neuroplasticity and all the brain growth that's happening at that time. And then there's also brain rules for aging, which is good, especially like I know in my mom's side of the family, dementia runs pretty hot and heavy. So it's something that she actually found that book. I didn't know that he had written one on aging as well, but she found that book because it's something that she's thinking about, and it's something that I should think about as well, because that stuff can be, passed on genetically. So finding that diversity is really important, and studying neuroplasticity is a way to increase your neuroplasticity.
Yeah, it's you got to treat it just like a muscle. And the other part to that, especially if you're thinking entrepreneurially, if you're stimulating your brain in interesting ways, it's going to give you the ability to borrow brilliance. So sometimes we can get caught up like sticking into our lane and refining our craft, but a lot of times it's things that we don't know, and then we actively go out and figure out how to know them, that ends up influencing all kinds of interesting creative connections basically in your work. And if you're working for someone else and you're just finding yourself feeling a little stagnant, a little bored, that's the time. Let's recognize that that's an opportunity to weave in practices just like movement that wake up your brain, that spark some different things that'll refresh your ability to kind of dive back into the work that you need to be doing. So wake up a different part of your brain for a minute, and that'll refresh you and keep you going in a more focused way.
Speaking of connections, connect is our next of the 5 practices. So we had move, think, and then connect is cultivating positive, balanced relationships with others as well as with yourself. You cannot neglect that relationship. It is the longest and most important relationship that you will ever have. It is the only relationship that will last the entirety of your life. You will be with you every single second. So that is a very important one to pay attention to.
Yeah, and definitely from a perspective of integration, recognizing what relationships mean to you and what you value in them is super important. Because if you don't know that, you could end up doing work that doesn't really align with how you like to move through the world as it relates to the people around you. So if you like deep, meaningful relationships and you work in an environment where it's very surface, where you can't have those conversations with people or really connect with them, you're going to feel unfulfilled by that. And the reverse can also be true. If you just like being kind of surface and just connecting with a lot of people, but not on a level where you have to get to know them too much, and you're in an environment, you become a therapist, that's going to be pretty challenging for you. That's going to be depleting. So recognizing the meaningfulness of connect and what that looks like for you is going to help you figure out how to put yourself in a position where the roles that you play in your life are consistent based on the way that you value the relationships that you have in your life.
Absolutely. And there's another great book that I read recently called Quiet, that's all about introversion. It's by Susan Cain. And that, connect doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. Some people want more connection to feel fulfilled. Some people need less. They need more time with themselves. And when you're talking about a relationship, it is very valuable to have these conversations about what connect means to you, what level of connection is important for you to feel fulfilled. Have those with the significant people in your lives, because that's, the love language idea I know has been kind of not debunked, but it's not perfect, but no model of personality is. It's a launch point, it's a lens that you can look through. So the love languages, are about having that conversation with your significant other. And then there's also a version of that book for children as well. So recognizing how your kids, your younger children, gain value from a relationship, what helps them feel that they're being seen and heard. That's different for everyone. So having this conversation with the people that matter to you, now you can get on the same page and start to recognize and appreciate, oh, just because this person doesn't want to hang out for the whole party doesn't mean they don't like me or that they're a jerk or a party pooper. It's just they have a more limited social battery. So, you appreciate the time that they're there, value the connections that you have, and then maybe find like less intense ways to hang out with that friend because parties aren't their thing. So, just learning about yourself and each other can help bring, a deepening to the relationship.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just reflecting on one of the I knew early on I wanted to be a teacher, but one of the reasons that I ended up becoming a martial arts teacher instead of a school teacher was I didn't want a 9 month relationship. I wanted a multi-generational relationship. I wanted to be able to watch people grow up, and then eventually even work with their kids and have that continuity. And because I valued that and I recognized that, us being a school teacher wasn't going to fulfill that. So I don't think I would have found that as satisfying as I did being able to have a student who was 5 and then transform through decades into this wonderful 30-year-old and being there through all of that and being a part of that process. So those are the types of things that if you understand what connect means to you, it makes it easier to recognize the right opportunities as they come up.
All right, next one is fuel. So this is developing a healthy relationship with eating and a mindful approach to nourishment. And notice that the word diet is not in there anywhere. This is more about thinking holistically about how you can fuel yourself in a way that fuels your goals in life, who you want to be. And this is obviously a huge topic, so we'll touch on it briefly. I'm sure there's future podcasts we can do if this is a topic of interest for people. You've done a lot of study because fuel is what fuels your movement activities. You couldn't go run a Spartan trifecta and do a 5K, a 10K, and a half marathon in a weekend if you weren't fueling properly. Well, you could, but it probably wouldn't be a very fun experience.
Yeah, that would not be pretty. And I think the big thing is not only thinking nutritionally, but that word nourish is important because sleep is part of that. And really, we use the term fuel instead of nourish because you want to think of it like you go to the NASCAR race and you're really excited, and there's no gas in any of the cars. They're just cool hunks of metal sitting on the track. It's you need to put fuel in the tank. That's what allows everything to happen. And the higher the quality fuel, the better the performance. So recognizing that and figuring out ways to, again, integration, how do you weave it in a way that's sustainable so that the process of you being your best self in service to whatever role you're in, work, home, and all of that kind of stuff, you're fueling yourself in a way that lets you perform as peak as possible.
And this is one that it's important to kind of experiment. It actually may be one of the easier ones to have kind of a data-driven approach to how it benefits you. I know not to pick on him, but John Tanaka, who is the host of the Dragon Mind podcast, he also runs our martial arts school, and he's a wonderful friend and the person you were referencing as starting at age 5 and is now 30 years old and running, being the leader in the business, the chief instructor. But he's very sensitive. Actually, you're very sensitive to the fuel you put in your body as well. So making sure to pay attention to what you're eating, not making too many changes at the same time, because then you don't know what it is you're reacting to, positively or negatively. But experimenting with, okay, if I have more carbs, then how does that make me feel? If I go a little heavier on the protein, like if I lean the balance that way, how does that make me feel? What happens if I take out gluten? What happens if I take out meat, or take out red meat or remove food dyes? There can be a lot of things that you can play with that have an impact, positive or negative, on our how we're feeling, how fueled we are. And the Whoop is actually a good tool for tracking that kind of thing. You can a Whoop is like a kind of like a Fitbit, a little different, a little leans more towards athlete, like people that are really looking to enhance themselves as athletes, and that will track your recovery. And you can also do like this log that says like, did you eat gluten? Did you eat dairy? And then it'll give you statistics at the end of the month and tell you, okay, eating gluten, negatively impacted your recovery this much or positively impacted your recovery. Like I know gluten makes me feel really poofy. Like it causes inflammation for me, like literally to the tune of a 3-pound swing when I'm eating gluten versus when I'm not. But my recovery is actually better. I sleep better. I recover better when I eat gluten versus when I don't. So now that creates an interesting choice of what do I value? And then can I also make up that recovery in different ways by making other choices, so I can not eat the gluten, but still, have a strong recovery.
Yeah, and I think the last thing with that is just to be clear that there's things like weight, body composition, energy levels, those are all symptoms. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a result of the way that you're fueling. So changes in the way that you fuel will over time change the symptoms. So, that's something that I look at a lot. I use an impedance scale so I can measure body fat as I'm going through my training cycles. So I know kind of how many calories I'm eating, the types of foods, and I can watch for fluctuations in that to make sure that I'm peaking at the right time for an event. So it's not that I'm trying to hit a certain number on the scale. It's that's data that references how well I'm doing in my fueling regimen. So don't judge yourself on it. They're your friend. It's just telling you how you're doing, and then you can make adjustments and test different things like you're saying.
Which leads to identity and empower, which is our last one. So to just recap them again real quickly. So you got move, think, connect, fuel, and then at the center of all of them is empower, which is a quiet, deep feeling of presence and personal power that flows to and through you. So this can show up in a lot of different ways. Your empowerment practices can be like journaling and self-discovery. They can be spiritual, they can be meditation, anything that brings you aware and into the present moment.
Yeah, and I think that's the key is again recognizing the practices like that, whether it's meditation or gratitude practice, whatever it is you do, is just reminding you of the fact that you can bring your awareness to the moment that we are in right now. And the tendency is our awareness is going to be in one of three places. The moment we're in right now, a past experience that we had that we're remembering or reflecting on or reacting to, or a future concern or thought or vision. So, and we need all three. They're important. It's just the ratio. And what I was taught through our mentor, who is a spiritual counselor, was too much time reflecting in the past can lead to depression. Too much time reflecting in the future can lead to anxiety. So we want to learn from the past. We want to prepare for the future, but as best we can, recognize that the only moment we have is the one we're in right now. So doing practices that help you connect to that lets you, as you move through your day, stay more and more present and engaged with the thing that you're doing, because that's the only thing that you can really experience doing. Everything else is either a memory or an expectation. Right? So that's the idea behind the empower.
Yeah, and empower, like I mentioned, sits at the center of all of these practices. And I think it might be fun in the future to bring this into the framework of the compass that we use with
Mm,
a lot of the different frameworks that we use from the 5 animals, which I've talked about before on the podcast. So the 5 Shaolin animals that we use as a model for leadership and problem solving, and the leverage points, which are lenses to view challenging situations through. So doing that compass might be fun. And if you're listening audibly, there is on our YouTube channel, which is at Momentum Learning Systems on YouTube, you can see videos of these podcasts, not my solo cast, but anytime that I do an interview, as long as the interviewer agrees, we'll do the video version on YouTube. And with that, maybe we can actually set it up where, we can let people kind of see how this all fits into the framework. of the compass. But for today, unfortunately, we have to end it here. This is a topic that we could talk for hours and hours and hours and hours on.
Yep.
But we have a integrated entrepreneur event that is coming up very soon that we have to get ready for. If you're interested in learning more about this project that we're working on, you can go to yourtieacademy.com. So you're like YOUR, tie, TIE, short for the integrated entrepreneur, and academy.com. And Ken will be joining me more in the future, but thank you for jumping on with me today. I think this is a helpful topic for people to think about in January to kind of get their framework around their vision for the new year, whether it's in the form of goals or resolutions, or just thinking about how you can continue to spiral up your life. So thank you, Ken, for joining me today. And thank you to everyone who jumped in and joined us to listen or watch on YouTube. And of course, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, keep being you.